I guess the NHS is always there, isn't it? It's a hardy perennial of topics that you reach for when nothing is more immediately obvious.
And it's a nice way, to be fair, to tie into the autumn statement,
Yes.
which we know that Jeremy Hunt is going to try and make it about mental health, about getting people back to work. And like I say, he touched on that very briefly in that. And then you've obviously got Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, trying to claim that all of his 5 promises, pledges that he made at the start of the year, trying to claim that 3 out of 5 of them have been met. Barely is my comment on that. And yesterday he obviously outlined another 5 more pledges.
How many
and he
is that?
did not mention the NHS.
10 pledges.
Well, actually,
are they pledges
some of
or
them
promises?
I don't even know. Some of them have actually doubled up. Reducing debt appears in both of them. So,
okay, so it's 9.
I don't know. Do we only back to 9? I
Does
don't
he have
know.
to reduce debt twice now? Does he have to bring it down and then bring it down again?
Double it.
So have to halve inflation and then halve it again. Would that be a quarter? I'm not very good at that kind of maths.
Not great.
What's the credibility question like here, Natasha? I don't think that many members of the public are sitting there really believing much of what's coming out of the Prime Minister's mouth at the moment. Not just because of what we pointed out earlier about blatant untruths regarding everybody said we'd never bring inflation down, when in fact everybody said inflation was going to come down anyway. And 3 days after saying that the economy was growing, something that he's just doubled down on, it emerged that the economy was actually flatlining. And that's not an opinion, that's counting. So if there was any hope that Rishi Sunak would signal a return at least to reality being reflected by prime ministers after Boris Johnson, that hope is probably disappearing or has gone.
Yeah,
already.
and this was the guy that said, I'm not going to tell, back in the Tory leadership campaign last year, is going to tell you what you need to hear rather than what I think you want to hear.
That's a great point.
And Rishi Sunak now is telling us that the economy is looking so much back on track, I think the Chancellor said earlier today, that we're now going to cut taxes. And I think he risks being incredibly disingenuous here, because that was exactly his selling point. He promised that he was going to tell us the truth about what was going on in the country and the economy. And I just don't think voters are going to buy the fact that the economy is growing, that debt is falling, when it literally is just a tiny 0-point percentage of growth, and the same with debt falling. It's just not going to wash, and we can see that in the opinion polls all the time, can't we? That voters just are not buying whatever the Conservative Party is throwing. And I think the question at the end of the day for voters and our callers will be, do you buy these tax cuts? Is this going to change your opinion of voting Conservative at the next election because they're going to throw a bit of money at you? Or are you going to look back at the last 13 years and go, am I really better off? And probably the answer is still no.
And Labour will keep hitting that sweet spot until the election. And of course, I guess the best way of illustrating your point about disingenuousness is to wonder whether the autumn statement that we're about to hear from Jeremy Hunt would bear any resemblance at all to an autumn statement that we might hear a year after a general election as opposed to a year before. This is part of an election campaign, effectively, and the desperate need to build some sort of platform on which to fight one.
It is, and that's always the way. Politicians always, just before a general election comes around, have an autumn statement and have a budget of sugar rush, tax cuts and sweetie promises for the voters that they want to stick in your mind when you're thinking about casting that at the ballot box. But is it going to wash when we've had such a difficult few years in terms of the public finances? And we know that voters always vote on the economic situation. And like we were saying earlier, it really does say a lot that Labour want to focus and want to fight this election on the issue of the economy. And, you've got Rachel Reeves, who will be standing up later to respond to Jeremy Hunt and respond to this budget, which perhaps is why Sir Keir Starmer decided to go on a slightly different tack in Prime Minister's questions just now, because obviously Rachel Reeves will have her answers to Jeremy Hunt later when she stands up and attacks this and goes, do you guys feel better off or not? Would it be better with the other guys? Well, you may as well give us a try, because these guys, look at what they've left you.
Back to the sweet spot. What do we know with a modicum of certainty that is going to be making tomorrow's headlines with regard to this statement?
Well, obviously, the main headline, the national insurance tax cut, has been floated around for ages. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see something else from the Chancellor, or a white rabbit that has perhaps been a little bit more closely guarded. And
a pasty tax? We haven't had a pasty tax for a while.
We haven't had that for ages. Can't remember the last time we heard the word pasty tax.
So what would that look like? What would a rabbit look like? Don't say fluffy with big ears.
I don't know in terms of what it could look like. Maybe it's going to be just bigger than we expected. Maybe the headline of cutting national insurance will be bigger than was predicted. We don't know how much it's going to be cut by, so perhaps he cuts it big, and that's his rabbit. Obviously, we do know this benefits crackdown is coming. We do know that they will confirm that the benefits and pensions will go up in line with the higher rate of inflation, so that will be good news for people on benefits and pensioners as well. That's already been confirmed. Also, the news that if you agree to electricity pylon in your back garden, you'll be getting some extra energy bill help too. So there is quite a lot that the government have already trailed of this autumn statement, but we know that everybody likes to hold back a few surprises in terms of that announcement. But I think, we are going into an election. The Conservatives will need to save some of those sweetie election promises for the budget for next week.
Of course. Benefits crackdown
next year.
No, that's it's an interesting choice of language there. Benefits crackdown. That is very much how it is being described. How much of it is political and how much is actually fiscal?
I think, to be fair to Rishi Sunak, and we sometimes are not always, I think that he is a spreadsheet man, he is a data man, and he will be looking at what he can do to try and grow the economy. And I think that is a little bit of a driver behind this. Obviously, politically, it does look good in terms of appealing to that Tory core voter that wants to see a crackdown on benefits and people who, they may look less favourably on. But I think generally, between the two of them, and they will be looking at what actually works, what actually can help drive the economy. And if they think that some of these measures can help encourage people back to work, and that will obviously increase tax receipts for the Chancellor, give him more money to play with, I think that will form a part of their thinking too.
It's going to be interesting to see how it works. So the idea of people who fail to find work for more than 18 months having to undertake work experience placements. This is for long-term unemployed as opposed to people on incapacity benefits, people who've had the work capability assessment. It's going to be very interesting to see what that actually looks like as policy rather than proposal.